Yo friends, what's up? I thought today I'd make a shorter video and show you why using async effects is bad. And the same is true for on mount, so that's not going to save you. Alright, but before I get started, here's a message from our sponsor. I'd like to thank this video sponsor, you, the viewer. You can support the channel through Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. Members get early access to videos, help shape the content, and a special Discord role. You can find all of the links in the description. Thank you for your support. Alright, here I have a simple counter, and let's say that we want to log the count value whenever it updates. We can actually use an effect for this. So effect replaces on mount, and it's really great for any side effect, right? You can fetch inside of here, you can do whatever you want. Please let on mount die, you don't need it anymore. And to track a dependency, we can just use it inside of here. So we can actually say count, and we can also, if we want, return a cleanup. So we can return a function, and this is going to rerun every time the effects updates. So you can say log cleanup. Alright, so now that I save this, we can actually go here, and now I'm going to increment this value, and we're going to see the output. So it increments the count, and it outputs cleanup. Alright, but things get a little bit more interesting once you start using async functions. So for example, we might be tempted to make this async. So we can go here, let's make this async, and maybe you read this warning, and you're like, okay, I don't know what this is saying. It's saying that it doesn't expect this type signature, I don't care, right? Maybe you go here, you throw in a nice tsignore, and you go on your merry way. Alright, but the first thing you're going to run into is that your cleanup now no longer is going to run. So for example, if I go back here, refresh, let me increment this, and now you can see you've incremented the count, but the cleanup isn't going to run. And the reason is very simple, it's because you're using an async callback that returns a promise, right? So for example, if I go back here and I say const banana, and I make this async, and let's just return a banana. Alright, so here I have this beautiful banana. So I can say banana, and then we can see that this is a promise. And Svelte doesn't expect a promise, so that is why your function is never going to run. Alright, so another thing I've read people say, okay, don't use effect, use on mount for this, you're not going to run into the same problem. And that is actually wrong because it works actually the same. So for example, if we use on mount here, you're going to see we get the same warning. Of course, in this case, we would actually have to unmount the component first, but you're going to have to trust me on this one that it's not going to work. And of course, you don't have to provide a callback here. You can use onDestroy from Svelte if you want, but actually wouldn't use these APIs because they're legacy now, right? So at some point they're going to be removed, so we're going to have to rewrite this to use effects anyhow. Alright, but today we're talking about effects, so let me actually just quickly remove this. So now we are back to where we started. Alright, so we can see that passing an async function is discouraged because it can cause all sorts of problems. You can get the function out of it back, it might cause race conditions and etc. But before I show you the solution, let me actually show you something else about effects that's really interesting. So let's read this paragraph from the Svelte docs. Values that are read asynchronously inside effects after an await or inside a set timeout will not be tracked. And this is also true when you use .then, for example, which the docs don't say. So let me actually show you how this looks like. So for example, here, if we say await sleep, let's sleep for 1 second. And then as the docs say, this isn't going to be tracked. So even if I save this, and now I'm going to refresh for good measure, and now we can increment this count, so it can go up to 4, and then we're going to see it's going to be 0, right? But if we actually use this before await, it's actually going to be tracked, but our cleanup is not going to run. So if I go back here, I'm going to refresh, and then I'm going to increment this count, and you're going to see actually it's going to work, but our cleanup isn't going to run. Alright, so maybe thinking, okay, forget about this async nonsense, I'm just going to use .then, and I can go here and I can just say .then, let's pass a callback, but you're also going to see that this isn't going to work. So let's refresh, and then we can just increment the count, and you're going to see it's not going to work the same as before. But of course, we can actually specify count inside the effect, and it's going to rerun. So this is kind of a poor man's dependency array, which is kind of funny, to be honest. And of course, you can make this more readable so people understand what this is doing. You can say if, and then you can put it inside if you want, or not, whatever you want, right? But let me actually show you another thing. So for example, if we forget about this, let's just use set timeout. So I'm going to pass a callback to set timeout. Let's also give it 1 second. We're also going to see that count is not going to be tracked inside set timeout the same as before, right? So now we can increment the count, and we're going to see the result is going to be the same. Of course, unless we pass in count as a dependency. So now this is going to be tracked and is going to rerun things. Alright, so if I save this, refresh again, and now we can just increment the count, and you're going to see because we're using set timeout, it's going to output it like this, right? So that is something really interesting. Alright, what are the alternatives? As we already seen, we can just use .then, so we can say sleep, Let's sleep for 1 second. And then you can do whatever work you need to do inside of here, right? And of course, I was using reactivity, for example, but most of the time you just want to use some async function, fetch something and etc. I don't know, whatever you're doing, right? So you can actually just say console log and you can log the count. If I save this right now, if I go back here, after a second is going to log 1. So let's actually just refresh. You're going to see after 1 second is going to log the value of count, right? Alright, but let's say that you want to use async. How can you do that? Well, the only important thing is that you don't make this callback async. Otherwise, you can do whatever you want. You can, for example, make a function, async function, log count. You can say await, sleep, you can pass 1 second, and then you can say console log count or something, whatever you're doing, right? It's really not important. And then instead of making this callback async, you can just go here and then you can say log count, right? So if I save this and go back here, it's going to log count after 1 second, same as before, right? Alright, and another thing you can do is you can use an immediately invoked function expression. And these always look mind-bending, but they're actually kind of simple. So you're basically just creating an anonymous function, you're returning something, and then you just need to wrap this bad boy like this, okay? So now you actually need to invoke this function. That's basically how an if works, right? And now you can do whatever you want inside of here. Of course, this has to be async. So this depends on you what you want to do, right? So let me actually save this. And now if I go back here, let me refresh, and we're going to see after a second is going to log the count. But yeah, that's basically it. And how effects work is also really interesting. So I can just remove this, for example. Let me just say hi for no particular reason. I'm just going to go here, and if I refresh the developer tools, I want to go to sources, and we can go to source routes. And for example, if we open page.svelte, so this is the code that we offer. This is our nice effect. But at the end of the day, this is the compiled output. So Svelte is going to create this user effect. And whatever this is, right, it's really not important to understand everything, but we can actually just look at what's going on to understand how this works. So we can go here, for example, let's slap a debugger. I'm going to refresh this so we hit the breakpoint. And now we can step into this. So this is what was in the compiled output, the user effect. We're going to get back this function that has some interesting thing. We can see that it's called from page.svelte, right? So that looks right. So the first thing it's going to do is going to validate this effect. And this is just going to pass this rune right effect. So now if there are some errors here, it's going to put it on this E thing, right? So this is some object, it has effect orphan. If it's unknown, teardown, and etc., it's really not important to understand this. Basically, it's just validating this effect. And this is something more interesting. So non-nested effect in a component should be deferred. So this is actually the part that happens when you use an effect, right? It's only going to run when the component is mounted. So this is checking, hey, if this is a non-nested effect, so a regular effect that you use, then this should be deferred. And this just does a bunch of checks to make sure that it's true, right? So you can actually step through this so you can see defer is true based on these things, right? And then if we're in development mode, it's going to set this property name with the value effect on this function that we passed in, right? So for example, if we step through this, we're going to see that after this is done, now this is going to have a name effect. And now this is the cool part. So now it has to defer this. So if it doesn't defer it, it's just going to return a signal. So a new thing that we can learn, effects are basically just signals, right? But a cool thing here is that, for example, this nullish coalescing assignment. So for example, if this E doesn't exist on context, which probably stands for effect, right? So if this doesn't exist, it's going to create an array on it, and then it's going to push the function, the effect, and the reaction. And we can actually see that the current component context, for example, is this function that it invoked it, right? So we can actually see that this is source routes plus page.svelte, because pages in sveltekit are just regular Svelte components. Alright, and that's basically it. So now we step through this, and now we understand why we can just pass an async function, because Svelte really just doesn't handle it. I mean, in theory, you can check if this is an async function or whatever here, and then you can maybe assign it to a variable, but again, you're going to run into race conditions and etc. So I think you need async effects or whatever else, right? And another interesting thing about effects is that they run on the microtask queue. So an effect is going to run when everything else is done. Of course, unless you're using effect.pre and etc. And I think how it works is, for example, let me just search in this folder. So for example, we can actually search for microtask queue in the Svelte codebase, or it's queue microtask, queue microtask. And you can see it has some things that might not be related to it. We of course don't care about the DOM, so it's unlikely that it's here. It's not events. This looks more interesting, the runtime itself. So basically this is probably where this gets queued. So if we open this, for example, and let me close this, we can actually see that this is where it schedules this effect. So it's going to schedule an effect, it passes a signal, and then it's going to check, hey, if this is already queued, then it's going to say, okay, this is queued, and now it's going to process this microtest queue. So it's going to pass in this function, process deferred. And if we actually just search for this, what is this? Let's see, process deferred. We can actually see it's right here. So this is going to happen on the next microtest queue, right? And now it's going to, again, set this value back to false. It's going to check against if this is an infinite loop. And then it's going to invoke this function with a weird name like flush queued effects. And basically what this does is going to run the effects and then it's going to get rid of them. It's going to do a cleanup and whatever else. But yeah, that's basically it. If you like what you've seen, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.